All right, let's dive right into one of the biggest questions in medicine, really. How do we actually understand what it means to be sick? Is it just a bunch of data points on a chart, a chemical thing that's out of whack? Or is it something way more personal, like a story that each person's body is trying to tell?
So, at the very heart of this whole thing is this really powerful idea from Dr. Srivatsa. The idea is that every single illness has a narrative. It's not just some dry list of symptoms you'd find in a textbook, right? It's a unique story, and it's totally shaped by the person who's living it. And honestly, that's been the foundation of medicine forever.
And this is where we hit a really critical question for our time. I mean, we're building these incredible new tools, right? We've got AI that can spot patterns a human doctor would totally miss. We're doing deep dives into our genetic code. But with all this tech, are we actually getting better at listening? Or are we maybe in danger of losing that personal story completely?
Okay, to try and answer that, let's go back to basics. Back to the absolute bedrock of all medicine, the patient's story.
Yeah, think about it. Before there's any fancy scan, any lab test, any algorithm, there's just a conversation. And taking a patient's history, it's not just about, ticking boxes and collecting facts. It's this super dynamic back and forth process. It's where all the context, all the nuance, it's where the first crucial clues start to surface.
And what's so interesting is how medicine has actually created a formal structure to capture this story. You've got the chief complaint. That's kind of like the headline, right? Why are you here today? Then you go all the way to the social history, which paints this whole picture of the patient's life. Each of these steps is like a chapter in a book, and they all build up this narrative that helps the doctor figure out what's going on.
All right, so once that story is on the table, the clinician's job is to become a kind of detective. They have to find the physical evidence, to translate all those words into actual objective signs they can measure and see. And they do this with a pretty classic toolkit.
And these four techniques, they're literally centuries old, but they are just as important today. So you've got inspection, that's just carefully looking. Palpation is using your hands to feel for anything unusual. Percussion is that tapping you see doctors do. They're listening to the sounds the body makes, like a dull sound over the lungs could mean there's fluid there. And auscultation, that's listening with a stethoscope, to the whole symphony of sounds happening inside your body.
But here's where things get complicated in the modern world. Dr. Srivatsa makes this point that relying too much on rigid protocols and algorithms, systems that are all about efficiency, can actually be dangerous. The risk is that you turn that rich, complex human story into just a simple checklist. And when you do that, you're going to miss the important details that don't neatly fit into a box. The system, in other words, starts to overshadow the story. But, the story of our health isn't just about what we can see on the surface or what a doctor can feel. There's this whole other unseen world inside of us, and it's telling its own really complex story.
Just think about these two incredible, invisible worlds. So on one hand, you've got the gut microbiome. We're talking trillions of bacteria living inside you, this whole internal ecosystem that affects everything from your immune system to your mood. Crazy, right? And then on the other hand, you have the unconscious mind. This is a psychological world that doesn't talk in words, it talks in symbols. One is pure biology, the other is psychology. But here's the kicker. Both are invisible, and both are absolutely crucial for our health.
So if we want to understand the language of the unconscious, we have to talk about symbols. The famous psychologist Carl Jung had a great way of putting it. He said, a symbol isn't just a sign for something we already know. It actually points to something unknown, something hidden from us. Think about a cross or a wheel. They're just simple shapes, but wow, they can carry so much meaning, so many layers. And this rich symbolic language is how the unconscious speaks to us, usually in our dreams.
And this quote from Jung just nails it, and you can often see it brought to life in dream paintings like this one. His idea was so elegant. He said the psyche is a natural, living thing. So just like a plant naturally grows a flower, our psyche naturally creates symbols. They're not just random junk, They're the genuine expressions of our deepest inner world. They're clues.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got the patient's story, the doctor's physical exam, and these two huge unseen worlds inside us. Now, let's bring in the newest player on the field, the one that's changing everything, the algorithm.
Now, the huge promise of AI in medicine isn't just about making a fancier checklist. The real game changer is that these systems can learn. So instead of a programmer feeding it a bunch of rigid if this, then that rules, the AI just sifts through massive amounts of data, like millions of medical scans, and it finds the patterns all by itself, patterns a human doctor might never, ever spot.
But
And this is a huge but. There's a shocking vulnerability here. It's something called an adversarial attack. Okay, so look at these two images. The one on the left is a normal medical scan. The one on the right looks pretty much identical, right? But it has this layer of carefully designed, almost invisible digital noise added to it. Now, to you and me, they look the same. But to a diagnostic AI, that tiny change can be enough to make it completely flip its diagnosis, from, say, perfectly healthy to cancer.
And as researchers at the NIH have pointed out, this isn't just some random technical glitch. What it means is that these incredibly powerful systems can be manipulated in ways that are super subtle and, well, ethically murky. It really makes you wonder, right? Can we ever 100% trust a system that's so easy to fool?
So all of this brings us to one of the trickiest areas in all of medicine. What happens when the story a patient is telling just doesn't seem to match up with the objective medical science? This chart here does a great job of breaking down 3 conditions that often get mixed up. The really important things to look at are the columns for symptoms and motivation. So, with somatic symptom disorder, the person is feeling real physical pain, but the cause is unconscious. They aren't faking it. Then you have factitious disorder. Here, the person is intentionally faking symptoms, but the reason is internal. It's a deep psychological need to be in that sick role. And finally, there's malingering, where someone is faking symptoms for an obvious external reward, like getting money or getting out of work. It's this really complex spectrum where the mind and body are just so tangled up.
So what this all goes to show is that our minds are powerful system builders. But here's the thing. Sometimes the systems we build for ourselves, our core beliefs about how everything works, can be built on a pretty shaky foundation, on a flawed interpretation of what's actually happening.
I love this quote about quantum mysticism because it perfectly captures a pattern you see in the health world all the time. The idea is that people take something that's really confusing, like quantum physics, and they borrow all the complicated sounding words to make their own ideas seem scientific, even when there's no real connection. It's such a great reminder that just because something sounds scientific doesn't mean it's true. The interpretation has to actually be right.
So, where does all of this leave us? We've looked at all these different ways of seeing and interpreting health and illness. The final and maybe most important step is to pull it all together. We've seen that to really understand health, you have to look through a whole bunch of different lenses at once. You've got the patient's own narrative, the clinician's hands-on examination, the invisible world of the microbiome, the symbolic messages from the unconscious, the powerful data crunching of an AI algorithm, and even the personal belief system of the individual. And when you get right down to it, the answer isn't about picking a winner. It's not the story versus the data, or the mind versus the body. The real future of a deep, meaningful diagnosis is all about integration. It's about having the wisdom to look at the whole person through all of these lenses at the same time.
And maybe that's the real takeaway here. For so long, we've treated illness like it's a broken machine, a problem that just needs a technical solution. But maybe, just maybe, it's time we went back to that very first idea we talked about. The idea that health isn't a problem to be solved. It's a story to be understood.